For everyone who has my felt cookie ornament pattern set, let me show you how to repurpose it to make mittens on a string. Skip the icing color template, use the cookie color template and my felt ornament tutorials to bead, stitch, and stuff 2 mittens. Then cut a piece of felt 5.5 inches long, 1.25 inches wide. Cut 11 inches of ribbon. And remember that tutorial I showed you on how to stitch ribbon into a felt ornament? I would recommend doing that. I forgot, I got distracted by my show and I had to tack it on afterwards. It's better if you sew it in while you're sewing the ornament, but if you forget, that's fine, you can stitch it on after the fact. It will be hidden by the little contrasting felt cuff we're going to add to this. There's a little bit of an overlap, so position that in the center and then just use a little whip stitch and a matching thread to sew this little loop to itself. It's fine if you end up grabbing a little bit of the felt ornament as well, but I mostly just stitched it to itself. Now, if you wanted to, you could stitch it to the top of the ornament for a little extra security. I just stitched it closed to itself using the blanket stitch that I've shown you in another video. And then as you saw for my video on adding the ribbon loop, when I got to the ribbon, I stopped doing the blanket stitch and just pushed my needle back and forth, making sure that I'm anchoring the ribbon inside the 2 layers of the felt. I found this was enough to hold the ornament, but again, if you're worried about it being more secure, if you have little hands that are rough with your ornaments, then I would stitch the blanket stitch along the top so that it is attached to the mitten that's underneath. After you've stitched the ribbon, continue on with the blanket stitch until you've reached the very end of this little cuff we're adding to the mitten. And as a side note, you don't have to put the ribbon in the center. You could put it on either end of the mitten so it looks more realistic as well. It will just change how the ornament hangs. When you've sewn to the end with the blanket stitch, it's time to tie off the thread. But because this ornament doesn't really have a front or a back, I recommend going back to your last couple of stitches along the top and tying a small knot. Don't forget, I like to sew my ornaments with hand quilting thread, so I find it's easy to make these small, subtle knots. I use my needle to tie off the thread, and then I'll show you my little trick for burying the thread as well. So once I've tied the final knot, I don't trim the thread at that point. I use my needle and I push the end and sort of bury it inside the felt ornament, and this is where I trim it. The mittens on a string felt ornament turned out so cute, but I made one mistake. I wish I'd flipped the mitten over and sewn the back on the other side so they could face each other like this, as opposed to hanging in the same direction like this. But on the tree, you honestly can't really tell what the front and back is. That's why I beaded both sides. P.S. You can take the stocking felt cookie ornament pattern and reuse it in a similar way. I added the same felt strip, this time with more beadwork. Let me know which felt ornament remix you like better.